In this video, we'll talk about 5 mistakes that beginner referees make. Whether you're just getting started with youth games or you're working with high schoolers and beyond, having a grasp of these fundamentals will be key to your success as a referee. First, if you want to see more officiating content, make sure that you subscribe to our channel for an endlessly and constantly growing library of videos. So first, let's talk about clear communication. Most referees struggle with confidence in their calls, and this comes through in the way that they communicate them to the rest of the people on the court. So for example, in other sports such as baseball, which we've talked about, the way that you communicate is by your voice. However, in basketball, in soccer, and football, and other sports, the way that you communicate is through your whistle, which means that if you have poor technique when blowing your whistle, you're going to come across unconfident in that you don't know what you're doing. So for example, when we talk about confidence in your calls, it's not necessarily believing that your call is correct, although it could be that, but rather it's making everyone else believe that your call is correct and that you know what you saw. And there's 2 parts of that communication. The first is making the call, blowing the whistle, and giving the hand signal. And the second part is actually reporting that to the scorekeepers. If it's a foul, the scorekeepers need to know exactly what happened, what number committed the foul, and which team it was for in order to properly record what happened on the court. Second is positioning. This is true across all sports, but in basketball especially, you have to be in the right position in order to be able to see fouls and violations that are going to happen in front of you. Basketball has 2 challenges when it comes to proper positioning. 1 is actually being in the right spot, and 2 is making sure that you're covering the proper zone. We've talked about this in a previous video, but in a 2-man system, each basketball referee has a specific zone that they are covering. Part of being a good referee is making sure that you have good communication with your partner in knowing what these zones are and making sure that you're not calling things that aren't your responsibility and making sure that everything in your zone is being called appropriately. The way to be good at this is just to continue to get comfortable with what zones you're covering and where your eyes should be during the plays. Another place where beginner referees struggle is in game management. Game management is things like the clock, the possession arrow, things that the referee may not be doing directly but needs to make sure are being done correctly. It's difficult for a beginner referee to have the mental awareness to know, hey, the clock isn't rolling and it's supposed to be. Or hey, the possession arrow didn't switch on the last play. If these things get missed, it can create a mess later in the game, which is why a referee needs to make sure that the scorekeepers are doing their jobs and that those things are being administrated correctly. Next, let's talk about game tempo. And no, I'm not necessarily talking about the speed that the game is played, but rather as a game progresses, it tends to become more physical. And if a referee is not careful, they can let this spiral out of control. A game getting too physical can almost always be avoided by a referee making clear, consistent, and strict calls early in the game in order to set the tone throughout the rest of the match. Part of that relates to the confidence that we talked about earlier. If a referee is unconfident early in the game, then that means that later players may feel they can take advantage of the officials. And finally, let's talk about consistency. Basketball can be a fast-moving game, especially as kids get older. And sometimes plays will happen so fast that a referee will believe that they missed their opportunity to call a foul or violation. Other times it can just be because a referee does not have a solid understanding of fouls and violations. Throughout the game, a referee needs to prioritize making consistent calls so that the standard is set even for all players. Referees, especially beginner referees that don't have a lot of court experience, need to constantly be refreshing themselves on the rules, on the language surrounding the rules, so that when they see things happen in real time, it instantly triggers a switch in their brain to know foul or violation. Hopefully, having heard these things, you can now be more aware of these mistakes that referees make on the basketball court. Again, this isn't a catch-all to fix everyone's officiating problems, but these can eliminate a lot of the problems that a referee might have with players and coaches throughout the game. Leave a comment with things that you've experienced and things that you've grown from as a referee. Subscribe to our channel and like this video.